Lili by Martin Sanders Whiteley. Chapter 17. The Countess. "What's wrong?" asked Laura. I realized that my mouth was open, gaping at the corpses on the floor, so I closed it. "I thought you were used to the sight of dead people." "I am. It's just..." I trailed off, lost in an ocean of questions that was beginning to flood my mind. Why were they here? Did Laura kill them? Did Van Helsing kill them? Laura must have been reading my thoughts because she responded to each of these questions as they came to me. "I'm not sure who they are or why they're here, but I didn't kill them. I don't know who Van Helsing is." "He's the vampire hunter who came after us," explained Carmilla. "Ah. I suppose if we wanted more information..." Laura trailed off meaningfully, gesturing towards the woman on the floor. "I really don't think that's a good idea," I began, but I was cut off by Carmilla. "Oh, come on. If she's unpleasant, we can just stab her with the arrow again. Take it out." I glared at Carmilla, projecting my thoughts toward her in the hope that she would read them. This is the woman that bit me, and the man that helped her do it. "Then you'd probably like some answers too," Carmilla replied matter-of-factly, not even looking back at me as she walked towards the currently lifeless woman. I was frustrated by her lack of emotional reaction, as well as the fact that she was right. I did want answers from the mysterious woman, but I also wanted answers from Carmilla. Why did she have a startled reaction during the middle of that mental conversation outside Laura's castle? Why did I dream about her before I met her? Carmilla had just removed the arrow from the woman on the floor. The hole the arrow had made in her body dutifully began unmaking itself, piecing tissue and cloth back together until it was as if nothing had ever happened. The body remained motionless throughout this entire process. I expected a dramatic awakening afterwards. Instead, her eyes simply opened. She sat up and let out a groan, possibly of pain, possibly of exhaustion or confusion. The first thing she saw was the man, lying in a pool of blood. "Sander!" she cried out, crawling towards the dead man until her arms fell on him. She held his corpse, rocking it back and forth, and ignoring the blood covering her body and streaming from her eyes. "Don't get too sentimental," interjected Carmilla. The woman looked up, startled. Apparently she hadn't noticed any of us yet. Carmilla continued. "Judging by that bow in his hands, I'd say he's the one who shot you with this." She held up the arrow. The woman looked down at the corpse of the man she had called Sander. She saw the crossbow in his hand, and understanding washed over her face. "Oh," she said simply, letting go of Sander's body. His head hit the ground with a soft thump. She stood up, looking down at the visible bloodstains on her arms and legs, and slightly less visible bloodstains on her black dress. It wasn't the same dress she had been wearing when we met, but it was similarly elegant. She shrugged and put on her best semblance of the confident attitude she had when I first saw her. She hadn't seen me yet, otherwise I'm sure she would have reacted to seeing me. "I am Countess Maria Zaleska," said the woman, in the most regal and firm voice she could manage, which was an impressively intimidating voice considering what she'd been through. "Who are you? And why did you bring me back?" Her voice kept the same tone, but there was a hint of desperation in it. "I am Lady Mircalla Karnstein," said Carmilla, "and I make a point of looking out for immortals like myself." Her voice was similarly regal in tone to Countess Zaleska's, but there was a tiredness to it, like an actor in a school play rehearsing their emotionally rousing monologue for the 20th time. It was then that I remembered that Carmilla's true name was Mircalla. Laura had called her Carmilla, and I mentally had followed suit. It felt right. Mostly just Laura, though, Carmilla conceded in a flat tone, shrugging casually while still trying to look elegant. I could tell that her confidence was beginning to flake off like so many layers of centuries-old paint. Laura? Countess Zaleska raised an eyebrow. Carmilla pointed a hand in our direction, but remained otherwise motionless. The arm dropped to her side limply. The eyes of the Countess drifted over to where Laura and I stood. She froze in shock, drawing in a sharp gasp. You, she said, her regality beginning to melt. Carmilla turned around to see what Countess Zaleska was so shocked at. Her face held an unconcerned expression, but I could see a fire behind her eyes as she looked down at my hand, which had unconsciously clasped Laura's. You, Countess Zaleska repeated, more emphatically. My train of thought lost, I turned to Maria. Me, I said simply. All the emotions and questions I had accumulated for her began to bubble up. I didn't really want to kill you, you know, said Countess Zaleska, uneasiness and regret in her voice. Then why did you do it? I asked. My voice projected curiosity, but my anger was becoming harder to contain. I just couldn't help myself. Red liquid was welling up in the Countess's eyes. I had Sander bring you to me to test myself, but I failed. My nature won out. Well, I began, the undercurrent of anger beginning to ripple above the surface. As a vampire myself now, I'm not sure I believe that. I've never just seen somebody and been magically overwhelmed with the urge to bite them. I'd never been this sarcastic before. Carmilla, who was drinking blood from an ornate but sinister-looking goblet that she definitely didn't have before, looked up at me. Really? She said, genuine disbelief on her face. I looked over to my friends beside me. They all wore the same expression. Well, I began, my anger weakening and turning to sour unease. I've killed out of anger, in self-defense, for need of sustenance. But never out of pure desire? Interrupted Carmilla. There was a gleam in her eye that I'd never seen before. You've never felt the irrational need for someone's blood? To meet them between life and death. To make them an immortal because you feel that you need them. This kind of monologue would usually be coated in sarcasm coming from Carmilla's lips, but she seemed oddly genuine. Carmilla had never acted this romantic and uncynical around me before, and I found it extremely unnerving. No, I said weakly. The gleam left Carmilla's eyes, and she raised an eyebrow. Pity, was all she said. Then she took another sip from the goblet. I wondered if it was from the castle, or if she had produced it from her pockets, which I was sure were bottomless at this point. Well, I guess that makes me weird even for a vampire, I said with a nervous laugh. I was trying my hardest to ignore the whirlwind of dissonant voices that was picking up speed in my head. I thought blood drinking was the price you paid for immortality, but others talked about it like another reward. Bloodlust wasn't rage or starvation for them, but an actual lust. I turned to Countess Zaleska. That was how you felt about me? I asked, timidness in my voice. I felt like the girl who had tried to drown herself, who didn't know if she had a place in this world anymore. Even among the dead, I now felt out of place. I still feel that way about you, said the Countess, a velvet texture beginning to coat her voice. She wasn't lying. I could see it in her blood-stained eyes, which were looking at me, but not into my eyes. I feel that way about Laura, said Carmilla, in a voice that held the truth, but told it in a way that mocks, like the voice of a condescending parent or teacher mocks. Laura, still clasping my hand, turned to me, and I felt something similar towards Carmilla, even before I was a vampire. She pursed her lips and gave me a small shrug. I could feel the whirlwind gaining mental momentum. Chapter 18. Eye of the Hurricane. All of that aside, I began, pushing my own troubles to the back of my head as well as I could manage. I still don't know why you came here, Laura. Laura gave a short, sharp, nervous laugh. It was disconcerting, given that I knew her true laughter. It's embarrassing in retrospect, but in a fit of heroism, I felt like I needed to save as many other vampires as possible. Her head went up to scratch the back of her neck. Given all the vampire legends around here, I figured Transylvania was a good place to start. I could feel my eyes narrow. Laura wasn't acting like herself. She wasn't telling the whole truth. But I wasn't about to stoop to mind reading. Not with her. Stories about my father? Asked Countess Zaleska. She had turned to face the window, watching the rainstorm that was beginning to pick up speed outside. Your father? Carmilla raised an eyebrow. I wondered how she and Maria managed to convey so much emotion just by raising their eyebrows. Well, continued the Countess, not my real father, but he called me his daughter, so I often began to believe that it was true. His name was Count Dracula. There was a flash of lightning outside, followed by a peal of thunder that was unexpectedly close. I jumped slightly when I heard it. Count Dracula? Mina and Lucy gasped near simultaneously, getting to their feet with the same near synchronicity. Count Dracula was the one who turned both Lucy and myself into vampires, Mina said, gesturing towards Lucy as she spoke. Lucy gave a small nod of acknowledgement. He never really treated us like children, he said, continuing Mina's line of thinking. More like lovers. It was like that with me in the beginning, the Countess agreed. That's his way. He lures you in with promises of love, then treats you like a child. I guess he didn't care about us nearly enough to treat us as anything once he was done with us, said Lucy with a bitter, humorless smile. I don't think he ever cared about anything, said Zaleska. At least not the Count I knew. I can only assume he had some humanity at some point in time, but that had been consumed by a pure need for blood. She turned to me. That's why I brought you to Chelsea. I had to test myself. Try to resist becoming what my father was. But I failed. Bloodlust doesn't make an immortal heartless, said Carmilla. I cared about most of the people I turned. I thought back to the mangled body in the inn and wondered about the truth of this statement. The Count was probably a sociopath in my life too. Reminds me of my so-called mother. Your mother? Count Zaleska raised an eyebrow. I now wondered if she usually expressed emotion any other way. I wondered if she usually expressed emotion. Is she anything like my father? She was, sort of, Carmilla replied. Someone else turned me. It was some man who found me alone outside my house. Before I knew what was happening, he was on top of me. Then I was lying on the ground in a pool of blood, screaming in agony at the pain in my neck. Then I was dead. I awoke to find that a woman had exhumed me. I knew her only as mother. She reoriented me and taught me what being a vampire was about. But gradually I realized that she knew nothing of what immortality is truly about. All she cared about was her next meal and about inflicting cruelty on others. She lacked passion. After your family killed me, Laura, I never saw that woman again. For all I know, she's still around. Either that or your family killed her too. I pondered all of this. Mina had rescued me from the grave, much like this woman had done for Carmilla. But I certainly didn't hate Mina. She had taught me almost everything I knew about vampirism, along with the rest of my makeshift family. And yet I wondered if there was more to being undead than what they had taught me. So the woman who was around you all the time the first time I was with you was your adoptive mother? Asked Laura. Her eyes had misted over. There was a similar look. Maybe a look, maybe not. In her eyes to the one I had seen before Carmilla and Laura's kiss outside the castle in Styria. I essentially knew what it meant, but it frightened me, nonetheless. I guess you could say that. Carmilla's lips curled into a smile. Part of me wanted to be angry at what I was seeing, but I felt I had no right to be angry. So my anger dissolved into a sinking sadness. Did you ever have any adoptive siblings, so to speak? Asked Countess Zaleska. I expected Carmilla to raise an eyebrow again, but her eyes narrowed instead. I couldn't tell if she was angry or not. I would like to speak to you in private, she said to the Countess. Very well, said the Countess. She turned to the rest of us. Leave us, please. In the next room, I wondered what the 2 centuries-old aristocrats were talking about. I tried listening at the door, but heard nothing. I realized they were using their mental voices. I tried to tune into their conversation. One mental syllable later, I fell to the ground with a splitting headache. I had forgotten how powerful Carmilla's mental voice was. I wondered how Countess Zaleska was able to bear it. Perhaps mental voices become stronger with age. But my train of thought was quickly cut off. Carmilla's mental voice must have knocked the thoughts I had pushed to the back of my brain to the forefront. Because all the sadness that had been collecting in the back of my mind soon flooded its entirety and took the form of a voice. What's wrong with me? I'm not sure if any of my friends care about me. No, that's stupid. How dare I think that of them? I feel broken. That's not surprising since I'm a vampire. I'm a monster. I kill other people to live. But Carmilla said there was more to it than that. Something about passion. It seems like everyone's hiding something from me. Something that makes all this bloodshed worth it. I feel like a monster for even thinking that sentence. And it doesn't seem like Laura really cares about me the same way anymore. At least not like she cares about Carmilla. But she's known Carmilla since before she knew me. How dare I put her in question? But I don't feel like I care about her. Not enough. I don't even know what that means anymore. What am I? I just want to die. I just want to go back to the water and be nothing. I could feel my eyes burning, and I looked down to see the red streaming onto the floor. Then I felt a familiar hand on my shoulder. Can I help? Asked Laura, her voice soothing me and slowing the flow of ruby tears from my eyes. We really need to talk about some things, I said, doing my best to choke back the bloody tears. All right, said Laura. I'm all ears. Why did you lie to me about coming here to the castle? Lie? If I didn't know Laura better, I would have thought she looked genuinely puzzled. I glared at her, and I hated myself for it. I never ever wanted to be angry with Laura, but I felt I had to be. Even telling myself I shouldn't hate myself added fuel to the fire of my self-hatred. I could feel the burning red building up behind my eyes and my lip quivering. I fought it, determined to keep my composure. Why did you really come here? Laura took in a deep breath that she didn't technically need, but probably felt like she needed. She exhaled. I'm sorry I had to lie. I hate lying to anyone, especially you. But I have a lot on my mind too. I love you. And I love Carmilla. But I love you both in slightly different ways, and I haven't put my finger on what the difference is. And Carmilla can be extremely possessive to the point of viciousness. I thought back to my dream, to Laura's fangs sinking into my neck. I had to tell her about the dream. I came here because I wanted somewhere away from everyone, Laura continued. Somewhere where I could collect my thoughts. I thought Transylvania would give me an at least somewhat plausible cover story. I don't know why people buy my cover stories. Me neither, I laughed, in spite of my tears. Special gardening soil, really? Laughter began escaping Laura's mouth, too. It was her real laughter this time, a full-throated sound that was somehow melodic. My laughter was suddenly strangled by tears, and turned to blood-stained sobbing. I pushed through my misery enough to choke out these words. I had a dream about you. Laura, who had taken her comforting hand off of my shoulder, placed it there again. There was genuine concern in her eyes. About me? I felt like a little child between my childish sobs and Laura's almost motherly comforting, but my brain was so racked with emotion that I didn't care at this point. I nodded, biting my lower lip and allowing more drops of crimson to roll down my cheeks. About you and Carmilla. Lily, whatever's troubling you about Carmilla and I is understandable. I'm sorting this out too. No, you don't understand. I hated contradicting Laura. This dream. I had this dream before I even knew who Carmilla was. It's been troubling me since I had it. Laura walked to a nearby chair by a cobweb-draped table and sat. She brushed the cobwebs off the chair next to her and gestured for me to sit. As I walked over to her, I tried to regain my composure. The sadness, fear, love, and confusion that had flooded me had congealed into a pulsating mass of undefinable emotion that knocked against my chest, unsure of what it was but demanding to be let out. I breathed deeply, realizing that there is another use for breath in the afterlife besides speech. I sat, emotion still swirling inside me, but more composed and confident than I had been. Tell me about the dream, said Laura. I sensed in her eyes as much turmoil inside her as there was in me. I recounted the dream to her in full, remembering the revulsion I had felt at discovering that I was her attacker, my confusion and fear at seeing Carmilla, and the pain of being bitten. When I had finished, I could see the confusion and concern in Laura. Without warning, before Laura could say anything, I was racked by painful sobbing again. I was angry at myself for breaking down again, but there was nothing I could do to stop the pain. And then Laura embraced me. All the shadows of life, and death, and undeath, and blood melted away, lifting weight from my heart. And the shadows of the night drew us closer together. I was again lost in an embrace that seemed to last both centuries and mere moments. I was in heaven. It was during this embrace that Carmilla walked in.